John Quincy Adams is born in 1767 in the quiet farming town of Braintree, Massachusetts, as tensions between Britain and its American colonies steadily rise. His earliest years unfold inside a household shaped by discipline, intellect, and a deep sense of civic duty, guided closely by his mother, Abigail Adams. From infancy into early childhood, John Quincy is surrounded by books, letters, and serious conversation, learning that responsibility comes before comfort. As he grows older, the world beyond the farmhouse grows louder and more uncertain. By the age of 7, he watches smoke drift across the horizon from the Battle of Bunker Hill, sensing that war has entered his childhood landscape. These formative years quietly shape his character, teaching him that history is not distant or theoretical, but immediate and personal. Before he can fully grasp the meaning of freedom, John Quincy Adams begins growing alongside a nation struggling to be born. By the age of 7, John Quincy Adams is no longer just observing history from a distance, he is about to enter it. In 1777, as the American Revolution intensifies, he leaves Massachusetts alongside his father, John Adams, crossing the Atlantic through dangerous, war-filled waters. Still a child, John Quincy endures storms, isolation, and uncertainty aboard the ship, learning early that service to a nation demands sacrifice. As the voyage stretches on, childhood familiarity fades behind him. By the time he reaches Europe, he is 10 years old, surrounded by foreign languages, unfamiliar customs, and the weight of diplomatic purpose. Letters, negotiations, and political urgency replace play and innocence. These years at sea and abroad quietly accelerate his maturity, teaching him resilience, observation, and discipline. Before reaching adolescence, John Quincy Adams begins understanding that his life will unfold not in comfort, but in constant motion. By the age of 10, John Quincy Adams finds himself far from home, living in Europe as the American Revolution continues across the Atlantic. Settled among foreign cities and royal courts, his childhood becomes defined by observation rather than play. He studies French with discipline, absorbing new languages and customs while carefully watching how power operates behind closed doors. Surrounded by diplomats and aristocrats, John Quincy listens more than he speaks, learning patience and restraint beyond his years. As months pass, he grows increasingly aware of his father's mission and the fragile position of the young American nation. By the time he turns 12, Europe no longer feels entirely foreign, yet America feels distant. These quiet, demanding years teach John Quincy Adams how nations negotiate, how alliances shift, and how responsibility can settle heavily on young shoulders long before adulthood begins. Between the ages of 12 and 14, John Quincy Adams moves deeper into the world of diplomacy, where silence often speaks louder than words. Living across Europe, he studies relentlessly, mastering French and absorbing the customs of foreign courts with quiet discipline. While other boys his age are sheltered by childhood, John Quincy watches ministers negotiate alliances and monarchs guard their power. He learns how ambition shapes nations and how fragile trust can be between governments. These years sharpen his sense of caution and self-control, but they also deepen his isolation. Far from home, he records his thoughts in detailed journals, holding himself to unforgiving standards. By 14, John Quincy Adams understands that knowledge is a form of armor, and restraint a form of strength. Slowly, deliberately, his childhood gives way to something harder and more enduring, a mind trained to observe, remember, and prepare for responsibility long before it arrives. At just 14 years old, John Quincy Adams enters a world few adults ever see. In 1781, he is appointed secretary and translator to the American diplomatic mission in Russia, becoming one of the youngest diplomats in American history. Surrounded by seasoned statesmen, he translates languages, studies negotiations, and observes imperial power at close range. The Russian court is formal, distant, and demanding, and John Quincy adapts quickly, learning precision, patience, and restraint. As he grows from 14 to 16, his sense of isolation deepens, but so does his discipline. He records his thoughts relentlessly, criticizing his own failures and pushing himself toward excellence. Childhood now fades almost entirely from his life. These years teach John Quincy Adams that service requires sacrifice, that power is often quiet, and that responsibility does not wait for maturity, it demands it long before youth is ready to surrender. At 16, John Quincy Adams returns to America after nearly a decade abroad, bringing with him a mind sharpened far beyond his years. The streets of Massachusetts feel both familiar and foreign, as the boy who once played in fields now carries the weight of European courts and diplomacy. Harvard College awaits him, yet he struggles to find peers who can match his intellect or experience. The lessons of patience, observation, and self-discipline are now ingrained. Childhood has receded into memory. He records every detail in journals, analyzes political dynamics, and reflects on the fragility of the young republic. These years are a quiet but relentless preparation for a life of public service. By the time John Quincy Adams reaches 19, he is already a man shaped by continents, politics, and history, a youth transformed into a young diplomat in training, standing at the threshold of America's new and uncertain future. From 19 to 26, John Quincy Adams transitions from student to young professional, shaping himself into a scholar and a lawyer. Harvard has instilled discipline, intellect, and a rigorous moral framework, but now he applies these lessons in the real world. He studies law meticulously, analyzing cases, principles, and the complexities of governance, aware that his father's reputation casts a long shadow. During these formative years, he writes essays on American independence, engages in debates on diplomacy, and hones skills that will define his public service. The world feels both vast and fragile, the young republic is vulnerable, yet full of possibility. Through late nights of study, careful reflection, and disciplined observation, John Quincy Adams builds a foundation of knowledge, patience, and principle. By the age of 26, he is not only prepared to serve, but already distinguished by intellect, foresight. By the age of 26, John Quincy Adams steps fully into public service, leaving the quiet rigor of law for the bustling responsibilities of diplomacy. George Washington appoints him as U.S. Minister to the Netherlands, a role that demands intelligence, tact, and composure. At 28, he is already negotiating trade agreements, navigating complex European politics, and representing the fragile interests of a young nation. While his peers pursue personal ambitions, John Quincy measures every word, studies every precedent, and records every lesson, knowing that his actions carry consequences far beyond his years. These years teach him patience, strategic thinking, and the subtle art of influence, laying the foundation for decades of diplomacy to come. By the time he reaches 30, John Quincy Adams is no longer just a lawyer or scholar. He is a statesman in training, shaped by discipline, intellect, and a steadfast commitment to the fledgling American Republic. From 30 to 40, John Quincy Adams rises to prominence as one of America's most experienced and capable diplomats. Serving in Prussia and Europe, he negotiates trade agreements, strengthens alliances, and represents the fragile young republic with precision and integrity. Every negotiation teaches him the subtleties of international politics, the weight of promises, and the consequences of missteps. Despite the grandeur of foreign courts, he never loses sight of America's ideals, balancing principle with practicality. These years are marked by tireless work, extensive travel, and relentless observation, as he absorbs lessons that will define his later career. By the end of this decade, John Quincy Adams is widely recognized not just for his intellect, but for his unwavering dedication to the fledgling nation, preparing him for future challenges where diplomacy, law, and politics will intertwine in the service of the Republic. Between the ages of 40 and 44, John Quincy Adams begins to navigate the turbulent waters of American politics as a U.S. Senator. Despite his Federalist upbringing, he demonstrates remarkable independence, breaking with his party to support measures such as the Louisiana Purchase. He understands that principle must outweigh loyalty to faction, and that the future of the Republic depends on wise decisions, not popularity. These years are filled with rigorous debates, careful correspondence, and deep reflection on governance. John Quincy observes the fragility of political alliances and the costs of compromise, shaping his vision for national unity. By the age of 44, he has earned a reputation not only for intellect and integrity, but for unwavering dedication to principle, positioning himself as a statesman guided by conscience rather than ambition, and preparing him for the higher responsibilities that lie ahead. At 44, John Quincy Adams embarks on one of his most significant diplomatic assignments as minister to Russia, representing the United States during a time of global uncertainty. Over 6 years, he negotiates delicate matters, observes international conflicts, and refines his understanding of power, diplomacy, and national interest. The harsh Russian winters and unfamiliar courts test his resilience, yet he adapts with precision and patience. These years strengthen his negotiation skills, sharpen his political judgment, and deepen his appreciation for the complexities of international law. By 50, John Quincy Adams has become a seasoned diplomat whose reputation extends beyond American borders. He returns home with unmatched experience, a keen understanding of global politics, and a disciplined mind prepared to influence the course of his nation. His service in Russia solidifies him as a statesman of foresight, integrity, and unwavering dedication to the young republic. At 50, John Quincy Adams assumes the role of Secretary of State under President James Monroe, marking the pinnacle of his diplomatic career. He crafts policies that will define the young republic, from negotiating borders to guiding foreign relations with careful precision. His experience in Europe and Russia now informs every decision, allowing him to navigate complex international disputes with skill and foresight. The nation looks to him for stability, and he responds with tireless dedication, meticulous analysis, and an unwavering commitment to principle. These years are both demanding and transformative, as he helps shape the Monroe Doctrine and strengthens America's position in the world. By 54, John Quincy Adams has solidified his reputation as a statesman whose intellect, discipline, and moral clarity influence not just his country, but the course of American history itself, preparing him for the next phase of public service. At 57, John Quincy Adams pursues the highest office in a deeply divided nation. The election of 1824 is fiercely contested, with multiple candidates splitting the vote and no one achieving a majority in the Electoral College. John Quincy's experience, integrity, and vision for national progress set him apart, but political alliances are fragile. The decision falls to the House of Representatives, where intense negotiation, persuasion, and strategy determine the outcome. Amid accusations of a corrupt bargain, Adams is elected president, carrying both the weight of office and the burden of controversy. This victory is not merely personal, it marks a pivotal moment in American politics, demonstrating the fragility of democratic processes and the enduring challenge of leadership. At 58, John Quincy Adams steps into the presidency fully aware that his integrity and commitment to principle will be tested in ways no previous office has demanded. At 58, John Quincy Adams begins his presidency under the shadow of controversy, elected amid charges of a corrupt bargain. Lacking a strong party base, he governs with principle rather than popularity, focusing on long-term national progress rather than fleeting political gain. He champions infrastructure projects, scientific advancement, and educational reform, believing that the nation's future depends on knowledge, innovation, and civic development. Congress, however, is often hostile, challenging his initiatives and testing his patience. Refusing to engage in populism or political theater, Adams persists with integrity, navigating opposition with strategy and moral clarity. These 4 years teach the limits of personal influence against entrenched politics, yet solidify his legacy as a leader who prioritized the nation's long-term welfare over immediate acclaim. By 62, Adams emerges from the presidency with a clear record of vision, principle. At 62, John Quincy Adams faces the harsh reality of political defeat, losing re-election to Andrew Jackson in 1829. The campaign exposes the limits of principle in the age of populism, and Adams departs the presidency with a sense of isolation and deep disappointment. Despite the loss, he carries no bitterness that compromises his integrity. His tenure, marked by vision and dedication, is overshadowed by political theater, yet history quietly notes the substance over spectacle of his leadership. In reflection, Adams evaluates both the successes and frustrations of his presidency, understanding that service to the nation often requires sacrifice and resilience. Though he leaves the office without the triumph of re-election, he does so with conscience intact and ideals unshaken. The defeated president now stands at a crossroads, poised for a remarkable second chapter in public service that few could have anticipated. At 63, John Quincy Adams makes an unprecedented return to public service, elected to the U.S. House of Representatives after leaving the presidency. No former president had ever resumed a congressional seat, yet Adams embraces this new chapter with energy and purpose. The transition from national executive to legislator is humbling but invigorating, as he channels experience, intellect, and principle into the daily work of governance. At 64, he begins what will become his most meaningful chapter, advocating for justice, education, and the nation's moral progress. Free from the trappings of the presidency, he works tirelessly, forging alliances across party lines and challenging policies that threaten the republic's ideals. These years demonstrate that public service is not defined by office or title, but by commitment to conscience and action. John Quincy Adams proves that even in later life, leadership and influence can grow stronger with age and experience. From 64 to 72, John Quincy Adams becomes Old Man Eloquent, a moral force in the House of Representatives. He relentlessly fights against slavery, challenging the gag rule that silenced petitions from citizens demanding abolition. Day after day, he stands in the chamber, reading letters, presenting arguments, and defending the principles of liberty and justice, often facing hostility, ridicule, and isolation. Despite advancing age, his voice remains clear, his arguments precise, and his conscience unshakable. These years demonstrate that influence is not tied to power or position, but to conviction and perseverance. John Quincy Adams proves that the wisdom and experience accumulated over a lifetime can challenge injustice with unmatched authority. By 72, he has established himself as one of Congress's most principled and fearless leaders, leaving a legacy of eloquence, courage, and unwavering dedication to human rights. At 72, John Quincy Adams takes on one of the defining moral battles of his later life, the Amistad case. Representing a group of enslaved Africans who had revolted aboard the ship, he appeals to the Supreme Court, invoking the Declaration of Independence and the principles of liberty on which the nation was founded. In the courtroom, his voice is commanding despite his age, his arguments precise, and his moral clarity undeniable. Every word underscores the injustice of slavery, appealing to both law and conscience. By 73, the court rules in favor of the Africans, securing their freedom and cementing Adams's legacy as a principled advocate for human rights. This singular victory symbolizes a lifetime of steadfast commitment to justice, demonstrating that even in advanced age, intellect, courage, and moral conviction can shape history and inspire a nation to honor its highest ideals. From 73 to 80, John Quincy Adams continues his relentless fight against slavery despite advancing age and declining health. He faces threats, insults, and isolation, yet his determination never wavers. Day after day, he reads petitions, delivers speeches, and challenges laws that attempt to silence the pursuit of justice. The House of Representatives becomes his stage for moral conviction, where intellect, experience, and conscience outweigh personal comfort or political gain. Even as frailty grows, his voice remains clear, his arguments unyielding, and his dedication uncompromised. These years define Adams not as a former president, but as a principled legislator and moral force whose legacy is built on courage and principle. By 80, he stands as a testament to the power of lifelong dedication, proving that steadfast commitment to justice and human rights transcends age, office, or personal ambition. At 80, John Quincy Adams continues his tireless service in the House of Representatives, unwavering even as frailty and illness grow. On February 23, 1848, while attending to his duties and reviewing petitions on the House floor, he collapses, struck down in the midst of public service. Surrounded by colleagues, he passes quietly, leaving the world not in the halls of power, but at the post where duty and conscience guided every action. His life, spanning the birth and growth of the American Republic, stands as a testament to integrity, intellect, and unwavering commitment to principle. John Quincy Adams demonstrates that true leadership is measured not by titles or applause, but by lifelong devotion to justice, moral clarity, and service to one's nation. His death at his desk symbolizes a life lived fully in service, leaving a legacy of conscience over ambition that will inspire generations to come.